Hi there, everyone. It's John Pushkar, and I'm normally here talking to you about hazards related to the fuels and fired equipment world. But today's a special episode from my real-life engineering series. Today I want to talk to you about something I've not addressed before, and it's about prison sentences. That's right, prison sentences for engineers. What a pleasant thing to discuss. Might not be pleasant, but frankly, it's kind of important. I want to remind you today about the tremendous liability that we all face as engineers, and about some of the obscure, and in some cases here I'm going to show you some of the very obvious ways you can end up in jail or federal prison for things that frankly maybe you didn't know were an issue, but in other cases things that, well, you really should have known they were an issue. So today's episodes are about some things that happened related to the Clean Water Act. And oh yes, there's an issue here having to do with toilets, of all things. Over the last 40 years, I've developed and led fuels and combustion equipment safety programs for the largest manufacturers in the world. Today, I'm bringing you knowledge, insights, and best practices about fired equipment and natural gas safety. Over the next few minutes, you'll get the kind of practical, real-life explanations that I've become known for. I'm going to take you on a little journey here through three cases. These are all federal cases. One where it was kind of an innocent thing, I think. Frankly, probably an over-prosecution, probably an overreach. The second was, well, maybe there was an oopsie. I can certainly understand how it happened. And the third was, frankly, I believe, a blatantly criminal act, something where the folks involved should have known better. And frankly, if you're involved, you should know better. So, like I said, I'm going to walk you through these. I've got little lessons learned after each one. And hopefully for somebody somewhere out there, I can help keep you out of jail. All of this information was obtained through the pacer.gov federal case website. It's free. Again, you go to www.pacer.gov. You subscribe to this. They've got a very helpful 800 number that you can call. The people there will walk you through questions that you have, help you find cases. It's a wealth of information. There's lots of documents as well that you can download, even some pictures and some depositions from cases. So would you believe it? A guy almost ends up in federal prison over toilet overflows. That's right, over clogged toilets. Would you believe it? Well, yes, it really happened to a gentleman named Lawrence Lewis. And let's take a look at how this debacle took place in his life. So if you think this can't happen to you because, well, you're just so special and you're just so smart and, you've got an engineering degree, you've been around a while, well, guess again. Because it happened to this gentleman, despite years of a successful career, being very good at what he did, being a very conscientious man. He was chief engineer at a military retirement community. He was already home for the night when he got this call. So Larry picks up the phone while he's at home. Hey, Larry, we got a big mess. That's right, the sewers are clogged up again. Larry says, well, call a plumber out there. Let's get it taken care of. And this certainly wasn't the first time they had a flooding issue, a sewer backup issue. Many of the residents relied on adult diapers. They were proud people. They were losing some of their functionality. Despite being told never to flush them down the toilets, of course, they were a little embarrassed. So it happened now and then. And when it did happen, a disaster was about to unfold. And that was the case here. Unfortunately, the part of the facility that flooded was a hospice area, the most critically ill of patients. These people had already been through a lot, and what was on Mr. Lewis's mind was to eliminate this problem as quick as possible and to get them back into a state where they were able to be somehow at peace with what remained of their lives. As they had done at other times, these materials were pumped out into a parking lot. They found their way into a storm sewer that was in the parking lot. And unfortunately, that storm sewer, well, it discharged into a creek that was in a very public area. Folks noticed pretty quickly that there was raw sewage accumulating in that creek, and they made phone calls to the EPA and fire department and other emergency responders. For those of you who are interested, there's some very compelling testimony from Mr. Lewis to this House Regulatory Committee, this task force on overcriminalization from October of 2013, and I've provided a link to these materials in the comments section of this video. So when Mr. Lewis showed back up at the facility, there were 30 to 40 emergency vehicles already in the parking lot, with lots of folks milling around waiting for him to show up. When he showed up, there were already investigators on the site, and they wanted him to sign a document that identified who was knowingly at fault here for what had happened. Mr. Lewis certainly wasn't the kind of man that would have wanted to have knowingly broke a law. I think his mind was primarily on making sure the hospice patients were taken care of and dealing with the matters at hand. I'm sure looking back he would have handled it a different way. But at the time, he couldn't sign a statement saying that it was the responsibility of his bosses. They weren't there. And so, frankly, he was there as the only one in charge. So he took responsibility for the incident. At the end of the day, it ended up costing him a felony on his record. It impacted his life in negative ways. He no longer remained employed at that facility, and he had difficulty getting other employment after this incident. So one of the lessons learned here is, be very careful of storm sewers. If you have a combined storm sewer, and here's what a combined storm sewer is. As you can see in the drawing, some sewer systems, well, they take both sanitary wastes and storm waters. Many of these have been reconfigured because what tends to happen is when you get heavy rains, you get overflows, and there are special provisions for overflows to just go untreated out to some natural body of water. So although these were popular at one time, they no longer are. I don't know that they're being constructed anymore. You should never be discharging anything to a storm sewer unless, frankly, it's naturally occurring stormwater. Or if you're permitted to do so. There's something called an NPDES permit, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit, which you could apply for. There's lots of rules surrounding that, and it's somewhat restrictive, as it should be. So case number 2. Yes, this is a real-life picture from that case. This is a matter of a plant manager at a facility experiencing a tank leak, and instead of doing the right thing, which he certainly now understands, he made a mistake. Maybe it's the kind of mistake you could make. So let's talk about exactly what happened and exactly how this gentleman ended up with a felony on his record. So in this case, the gentleman gets a call saying that, hey, there's a tank leak. It happens to be naphthalene, a carburetor cleaner. When mixed with water, this stuff turns milky white, as you can see in the photograph, and as you saw in the creek in the last slide. The plant manager instructed folks to just take hoses and wash down the leak. Maybe he was concerned about a fire risk potential. I don't know. But they washed this material into the parking lot, into a storm sewer. Now, there are facilities which have their own pre-treatment systems. And in many facilities, especially around tanks where it's recognized there could be a leak, these materials go to an impoundment, or there's some containment, or again, it's to an on-site pre-treatment system where it could be stopped. In this case, these materials were washed out to a parking lot. The storm drain from this facility? Well, it ended up in a tributary to the Chattahoochee River. This tributary ran through sections of neighborhoods where it was very obvious to people that something was very wrong. They called fire departments, first responders, and they all came out, investigated, and traced this back to the facility. Unfortunately, this gentleman made it worse by making some false statements. He was eventually convicted of a felony. There were fines, there was house arrest, there was probation. What are the lessons to be learned here? If you don't have containment, if you don't have on-site pretreatment, there are hazmat teams that you could call. You call the local fire department. You call the local sewer district. Our sewer district here in Cleveland, Ohio has 24/7 hazmat response. There are people who will come out with the right materials to provide for barriers or to start to soak up the material that's been leaked. Your only option is certainly not to wash it to a storm sewer. So what I'm showing you here are pictures from the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. They have a publication that's all about industrial surveillance. So to the left of my picture, there's a couple of guys outside of an industrial facility with a manhole open, and they've got a dipper. They're taking a sample of what's coming out of this facility. To the right of my picture, you see an automatic sampler. I've used these to do studies for industrial clients when they had been given citations by sewer districts and they wanted to understand when and why and how things were happening. So you see the way those things work is, you see the little carousel there, there's a bunch of sample bottles. Well, they'll come to your facility, sometimes in the dark of night, open up a manhole, it's all battery powered. They'll drop it down on ropes into your manhole, drop a little hose into your outfall. This thing will automatically take samples like maybe every 15 minutes for 2 days. They'll come back, pick it all up, take it to their lab, and they'll start to understand what your discharge characteristics are. You're not going to hide anything from these people. Maybe you didn't even know that they had industrial surveillance programs. Well, I'm here to tell you that they do. And in case you didn't know, there are certainly rules for what you're supposed to put down to a publicly owned treatment works, a POTW, and you better not get that wrong. You better not get hazardous wastes to them. They don't like that. It's a serious violation, and yes, you can end up in jail for that as well. Last but not least, let's take the case of a serious criminal event that happened, and this happens to be in my former hometown, Youngstown, Ohio, where I grew up and went to college and still have family. So in this particular case, a gentleman had dumped fracking wastes into a tributary that ended up in the Mahoning River. And the Mahoning River, it doesn't always look kind of brown like that. Sometimes it's very pretty, but it's a very industrial river. It headed through the steel facilities and the industrial heart of Youngstown and the surrounding facilities. It's never really been a recreational river. It's made a big comeback over the past 50 years. Certainly it doesn't deserve to be treated in the manner that this gentleman treated it. So this particular case ended up in 3 indictments, felonies, prison time. This gentleman had a facility where he collected fracking wastes, which is a combination of brine, some oil residues, some drilling muds, trace elements of benzene and toluene and other chemicals. And these are generally processed. Sometimes they're deep well injected, but they should never just be discharged to a waterway as they were in this case. So there were a total of 58 storage tanks, 20,000 gallons apiece. If you do the math, they had over 1 million gallons of storage capacity for this stuff on the site. This wasn't 1 or 2 little tanks that got released. The other thing that occurred is that this gentleman directed the dumping of these tanks only at night through a hose when no one else was around. The dumping was into a storm drain that led to a tributary that was about a mile away from the Mahoning River. It all ended up in the Mahoning River. Investigators identified that That tributary, it was essentially dead. They couldn't find living insects or other aquatic life in that tributary. I'm showing you on the lower left something that you hope you never see with your name on it. It's an actual criminal complaint. So what are some of the lessons learned here? Well, you will get caught. You should know the rules. And if there are permits required, you need to have those permits. You see, I didn't really understand that there are environmental forensic investigators. This gentleman here, David Barlow, there was an affidavit from him. I didn't know, frankly, that there were people like this employed by the EPA. It's probably best that if you don't know, you never need to know. So this gentleman here indicates in his affidavit that he's a special agent, and this is what he does. He's out of the Cleveland office, and he investigates Clean Water Act criminal violation types of things. I didn't know, for example, it says in the second paragraph there that he's authorized to carry firearms. So they got investigators running around that, have guns. I didn't know that was even a thing. So again, if you're in charge of a facility, if you're an engineer supervising a project, and let me give you an example of the types of projects that are getting busted for this all the time. If you're overseeing the construction of a facility, ask some of the large publicly traded home building companies how they've been doing with runoff violations and not having silt fences or erosion controls. That's been a major area of focus for Clean Water Act violations. I hope if I've accomplished nothing else here, I've heightened your awareness of yet one more area of responsibility that we have as engineers in real-life situations. We're, of course, responsible for a lot. As licensed professional engineers, of course, we carry the responsibility of trying to maintain a safe environment, a safe work product for the public, and staying out of jail for Clean Water Act issues. Well, that's just one more thing that you have to be aware of on a daily basis as a real-life engineer. Thank you very much for watching this episode. I hope it's been helpful for you. Hi, it's John Pushkar. I hope you found this episode useful. If you'd like to know about more ways that I can help, you can check out my website at www.prescientts.com. There you'll find information about the Prescient Technical Services Online School, my book, Fuels and Combustion System Safety, What You Don't Know Can Kill You, and also about some of the consulting projects that I've been providing to clients for the past 40 years. Things like implementing inspection and testing programs on a corporate enterprise-wide level, things like reviewing and commenting on capital equipment purchases that involve combustion equipment, and even being a legal expert if things go really wrong. Once again, thank you for attending, and remember, be safe out there. The life you save, it just might be yours.